Ah, the Golden Age. Wait, Golden Age? Isn't that the 70s? Well, the 50s has also been referred to as such, at least regarding the lower weight classes. For my money, I'd still give the 70s the nod, but if I had to call the 50s the Golden Age, that would make the 70s the Diamond Age, and the 90s the Platinum Age. Now, why is the 50s in particular the end of the black and white era? Hear me out. Yes, the 50s had fights in color, and the 60s would still have fights in black and white, but in my opinion, it was the arrival of Cassius Clay, later Muhammad Ali, that ushered in the color era. Ali's boisterous and brash character in and out of the ring transcended the medium and the sport, like splattering paint on a barren canvas. He would become the definition of a needle mover. The ultimate people's champion, indeed. Everyone would follow his lead. It is for this reason that every fight in this timeline will be in its original black and white form, even if color editions exist. Enough label talk. We've got a long intro ahead, because this will be the only decade I'll be covering in timeline form from the black and white era. Don't be disappointed. The 40s and before will still get their just dues throughout other documentaries. Let's go all the way back to August 29th, 1885. For perspective, that's only 20 years after the conclusion of the American Civil War in the days of Abraham Lincoln's presidency. On another note, August 29th is an important day across fiction and reality for other reasons. It's Michael Jackson's birthday, it's the day that the machines rise in the Terminator franchise, and much more. You should look into it. Seriously, it's a rich day in human history, and of course, the most beautiful sport in the world shares in said history. On said day, John Lawrence Sullivan beat Dominic McCaffrey to become the first man and jump-started the heavyweight lineage. Controversy aside as to whether Sullivan should have received the honor, he reigned until 1892 due to his next gloved fight coming against James John Corbett. Corbett won. Bob Fitzsimmons beat Corbett 5 years later in 1897. James Jackson Jeffries beat Fitzsimmons in 1899 and retired in 1904. Marvin Hart claimed the lineage in 1905. Now let's speed run the lineage from Hart onward. Tommy Burns, Jack Johnson, Jess Willard, Jack Dempsey, Gene Tunney, Max Schmeling, Jack Sharkey, Primo Carnera, Max Baer, Jim Braddock, and Joe Louis, who retired as champion on March 1st, 1949. The very next day, it was reported that Louis requested and received permission to promote a bout for his title, specifically the NBA portion. This was his first grand move as director of boxing for the newly founded International Boxing Club, or IBC. Ezzard Charles, by virtue of being one of two top-ranked contenders alongside Jersey Joe Walcott, claimed the lineage when he beat Walcott on June 22, 1949, and is heading into our timeline as the lineal champ. Wait, is he? You see, Charles and Walcott were not viewed as great heavyweights, and you can imagine how difficult it was to see them as such in the wake of Joe Louis retiring, coupled with the division not hosting a respectable crop of challengers. I touched on them both being shadow champions in my video on the subject a while back, available to watch at the bottom of the description. Collectively, they had a good deal to prove for their legacies at the heavyweight rank. And what if the Brown Bomber returns? What of the lineage then? I doubt that'll happen anyway. Right? If you aren't convinced that Charles and Walcott weren't viewed highly, note that despite Ring Magazine ranking them as 1 and 2, they didn't put their own title on the line for the bout. Then there's the elephant in the room that Walcott should have become the new champion in 1947. But an error in the judges' scorecards gave the fight to Louis, and this was never corrected. At least that's what I read on BoxingScene.com. The point is, we're in an uncertain time for the heavyweights. Before I move on from this point, I'd like to correct something from the 2000s timeline. In it, I said that Vitaly Klitschko was never the lineal champion because he never gathered most or all of the titles. I should have said that he never beat the number 2 ranked fighter of his time in Chris Bird, who also had a win over him. Moving on. Of course, the other entities like the National Boxing Association, which is the NBA that I mentioned earlier, and the New York State Athletic Commission rose during that time. Welcome to the grand finale of the incredibly storied black and white age. In hindsight, the expectations are high as we usher in a new era. It's the first big-time era change since the beginning of the lineage when John L. Sullivan became the bridge from bare-knuckle fighting to gloved prize fighting. No disrespect to Jack Dempsey. His era was huge as well, too. That's arguable. I also hope you enjoyed this miniature preview of the coming Lineal Champion series here on BoxingPedia. That's right, I said series, not just one video. We're going to cover each Lineal Champion's reign and time in detail. In due time. In due time. Further in the history of the black and white era was the birth of Olympic boxing in 1904. At the very first event, American Samuel Berger became the first heavyweight gold medalist. Heavyweight back then was 158 pounds. Yikes, what a difference from the 50s and especially today. Fun fact, Oliver Kirk won gold at 2 different weight classes during these Olympic boxing games and still reigns as the only boxer to ever do as such. There was even a women's boxing showcase, which was pretty impressive, given women's boxing wouldn't become a staple in the games until 2012, some 108 years later. Sheesh! As for Olympic boxing during this age, I will cover it in its own video. Be on the lookout. The 40s saw the end of the Joe Louis dynasty, and the division open up for the cluster of contenders who've been waiting since 1937 for a chance to actually become champion. No one was beating Joe Louis. Louis stamped himself as the arguable greatest heavyweight champion in history. I tend to agree. He was the people's champion, and now a shadow had the ultimate opportunity. That appeared to be Ezzard Charles, but I'm sure you can imagine that there's many surprises in store here in the 50s. There's Jersey Joe Walcott, of course, but there's another heavyweight out there who's on his way to making historic waves. Waves we still see the impact of today. The Brockton blockbuster is on the rise, though it's important to note that even with the excitement that he brings, he isn't viewed too favorably either. Who will emerge to fill the Joe Louis-sized void in the marquee division? Let's witness the end of the final era and the beginning of the new saga of ages. No footage, but a necessity in the tale that is the legacy of the Brockton blockbuster Rocco Francis Marchigiano. Opening our decade is the best young heavyweight on the come-up. Rocky Marciano debuted in 1947 and accumulated 24 victories up to this point, all but 2 ending before the final bell. Roland LaStarza also debuted in 1947 and built a likewise undefeated streak of 37 wins up to now. Someone's O has got to go. LaStarza would become the 3rd man to take the young Rock the distance in a 10-round split decision. Rocky won 9 rounds to 6 from the referee, but New York's supplemental scoring rendered it a split decision. Those ringside believed LaStarza had earned the nod. According to the Times, Rocky floored Raleigh in the 4th round. Rocky was penalized in the 8th round for a low blow, and ultimately won a decision that was deemed a miscarriage of justice. Remember this LaStarza fellow. I have a feeling he'll be back to block the pathway of Marciano again. As for The Rock, the talk is that he may be due a title shot soon. We'll see. For his first televised appearance in the timeline, Jersey Joe Walcott scored a 10-round unanimous decision over Hein Hoff. It was a surprise to some, given they expected the German champion to prevail. A disappointment, for the promoters at least, came in the expected 80,000 crowd dwindling to 25,000. No doubt due to the rain and the price. Since losing to Ezzard Charles after dropping the duology to Joe Louis, Jersey Joe has steadily remained a top contender. He wants to be heavyweight champion, and I have a feeling he won't stop until he gets it. The ball is in his court. Such is the advantage of the reigning National Boxing Association champion Ezzard Charles. The Cincinnati Cobra's first showing of the decade has unfortunately been lost to time, and there exists no available footage. If you're wondering why this fight is happening so late in the year, it was postponed twice. The first was due to a rib injury for Charles, delaying the original February 28th date to March 29th. It was delayed indefinitely when it was found the rib injury had bruised a heart muscle, hence our August framing. The bout was stopped in the 14th due to the challenger, Freddie Beshore, sporting a badly swollen and discolored right ear. The crowd booed their disagreement, and the numbers ought to inform you of the state of the division at this point and how the public views Ezzy. The gate was the smallest since Jack Dempsey first won the title back in 1919, only drawing a crowd of some 6,000. If you remember, Jersey Joe just drew 25,000. Yikes. To add to this, it was his third straight dud as champion. His first defense drew a poor crowd, and his second contained a hostile crowd that favored the challenger. This was despite it being the first title defense in the San Francisco Bay Area since 1909 under the reign of Jack Johnson. Super yikes. We got a beauty on deck for the sake of history. The Brown Bomber has returned, throwing a real wrench in the state of the division. Ezzard Charles, on paper, was the rightful heavyweight champion. He'd beaten the best heavyweight in Jersey Joe Walcott, and with Joe Louis's retirement, this meant that he had a rightful claim to the heavyweight lineage. However, the return of Louis and the fact that no one has beaten him for the lineage means he stakes claim back to it. In other words, we have a case of both men staking a fair claim to the lineage. What Louis does not still hold, however, is the vacant Ring Magazine title. He officially lost that when he retired back in 1949. All that being said, this battle will determine who the lineal and ring champion is once and for all, barring a draw. Add to this all that the New York State Athletic Commission is finally ready to recognize a champion. We are finally getting an undisputed champion. No more questions. Old Joe entered this bout at 218 pounds, the heaviest of his career. Still, he claimed this was more of a continuation than a comeback and said he was in the best shape he'd been in since returning from World War II. He predicted a knockout of Charles, who was 33 pounds lighter. It showed too, as Charles outboxed Louis all around for a 15-round unanimous decision, something no one else had ever done, nor would anyone else do. Sugar Ray Robinson's claim that Ezzy was the most underrated fighter he knew proved true. Both men sported the wounds of war. Louis, bloodied, beaten, and devastated, didn't stick around for the post-fight. Where does he go from here? Charles was humble in victory and praised the Brown Bomber. I'd say this was just the turnaround the new champion needed. Old Jersey Joe is back in action on his quest to capture the heavyweight crown. Rex Layne, an unsung fighter of the time, had only one loss on his record. A loss he not only avenged against Dave Whitlock, but he won the trilogy as well. Given Layne was fresh off two separate draws and Walcott appears driven for another title shot, you may be surprised to learn that Walcott dropped the decision to Layne. Maybe you aren't, considering Rex is no pushover. Either way, Walcott was a 5-1 favorite, making this quite the upset. At only 22 years old, Rex Layne has established himself as a heavyweight contender. Where does Jersey Joe go from this derailing? Apparently, right into a title shot. You'll see next year. The big comeback didn't go as the Brown Bomber had planned, but he still got debt to pay off, and thus he must fight. Cesar Brion would serve to get Joe Louis back on track, as the ex-champion won a unanimous decision over him. Good to see the great Joe Louis end the year on a win, and just 2 months after the loss to Ezzard Charles. Back on the defense is the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, Ezzard Charles. Again, we're without any footage for this one, but just know that the Cincinnati Cobra knocked his man out in the 11th for his 5th title defense, his first as undisputed champion. Unopposed, undisputed, and unchecked. $1950 has come and gone. These are Ring Magazine's top 10 heavyweights. It's all about Ezzard Charles, Joe Louis's successor, however begrudgingly in the hearts of boxing fans, is upon us. Ring Magazine didn't begin awarding Upset of the Year until 1970, so I'll be handing them out myself. My pick is Rex Layne over Jersey Joe Walcott. That could be a career derailing, but it remains to be seen. A heavyweight round didn't earn Ring Magazine's honor. Therefore, I'm selecting the 14th round of Charles Louis. In said round, Charles had Louis in trouble and may have come close to scoring a knockdown, though Louis did survive. Similarly, Ring Magazine didn't select a heavyweight fight for its Fight of the Year. My choice goes out to Ezzard Charles' title-defining victory over Joe Louis. There was no more question that Charles was the one and only champion. Ezzard Charles, in his second winning of the Ring's honor, brought home the Fighter of the Year honor. He was the definitive heavyweight champion now. No more questions. Who else has beaten Joe Louis besides Max Schmeling? In January, the Yellow Shirt Bandit was caught by St. Louis police for crimes carried out by a gang, which included muggings and armed robberies. On June 1st, this bandit, who was the leader of said gang, began his 5 years prison sentence. While serving in the Missouri State Penitentiary, he was introduced to boxing. We'll catch up with him down the line. Rocky Marciano won his other 5 fights in 1950. 4 of them were knockouts, and the other was a unanimous decision win over Tiger Ted Lowry. In 1949, 15-year-old Cleveland Big Cat Williams made his professional debut at light heavyweight, and yes, you heard that right, only 15 years old. Before year's end, he stepped up to heavyweight and never looked back. He did not fight in 1950. Despite the stability of Ezzard Charles, the question of contenders is circling. Sure, there's Jersey Joe, but someone else is going to have to stand out and get over in the eyes of the fans. Wish them luck, fight fans.